Hi, I'm Mark Madison, the historian at the National Conservation Training Center in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And I'd like to welcome you to another in our series of broadcasts we like to call Conservationists in Action. We borrowed it from Rachel Carson. She wrote a series called Conservation in Action. Today we're very fortunate to have a renowned reporter and author, Jennifer Ackerman, with us. Thank you, Jennifer, for agreeing to carve out a little time in your very busy schedule to come out here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And before I turn it over to Jennifer, I'd like to just introduce her. Jennifer has been writing about science and nature for 30 years. She's got quite an eclectic assortment of books, including Achu, The Uncommon Life of Your Common Cold, another book called Sex, Sleep, Eat, Drink, Dream, A Day in the Life of Your Body, a book called Chance in the House of Fate, A Natural History of Heredity, a book called Notes from the Shore. She's also a contributor to Scientific American, National Geographic magazine, and the New York Times, among others. Her most recent book is a New York Times bestseller called The Genius of Birds. It's a wonderful book. I read it last week and greatly enjoyed it. And she's going to tell us a little about how smart birds are. So thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mark. So as Mark said, I've been writing about nature and science for about 30 years. And what I've written about oceans and microbes, the human body, whales, dragonflies, but working on this book was a real high point. What I learned researching it was really a revelation to me, not just about the surprising brains of birds and their astonishing mental skills, but also about the nature of intelligence and what we can learn about it by studying how another creature thinks. So, you know, we're kind of in the midst of a sea change in our understanding of the minds of other animals, and birds have really been a big piece of that progress. You know, we thought that birds had such tiny brains, that they were really capable of only the simplest mental processes. Right. But that has really changed in the past 10 years or so. Now we realize that birds are far more intelligent than we ever imagined, and that they're capable of cognitive skills that are really closer to our primate relatives than to their reptilian ones. So, you know, the old expression, you bird brain, used to be a bit of slander, but not anymore. Like this raven, birds can think logically. They can reason on par with young children. They can solve complex problems. They can make and use their own tools. They can count. They can teach one another new things. They can understand basic principles of physics and pass along cultural traditions, whether they're modes of song or styles of tool making. And birds can remember the past. They can plan for the future.
Thank God they can remember the past.
Sometimes better than we can. You know, birds can eavesdrop. They give gifts. So I wanted to share a few examples with you of some of these really impressive mental skills. So we're going to start with the chickadee. Birds actually communicate in ways that resemble language. Chickadee calls are considered among the most sophisticated and complex systems of communication of any land animal. Really? Yes, so their language-like calls are used to warn of predators. And these warning calls specify both the type of predator, whether it's arriving by air or land, and also how dangerous that predator is. So the number of Ds at the end of its call actually signify the degree of threat. And these are mobbing calls. They're calls to summon other birds to respond to the threat really in a response that's calibrated to the magnitude of the threat. So the greater the number of Ds, the greater the threat, and it's really related to size. So you have, like, you know, 1 D for a minor threat and 4 Ds for a major threat. So what I tell people is, the next time that you pass a chickadee, note the number of Ds at the end of its call.
But they all sound the same to ordinary layperson.
Yes, they do, and you might have thought they were just sort of mindlessly chirping away, but they're actually tweeting intelligence to other birds.
It's one of the things I love about the book. All the birds you describe, from very common ones to pigeons and crows, you can't look at them the same again. It's like, that's actually a very wise bird. I should take it more seriously.
Well, thank you. One of my favorite comments from a reader was that reading the book was like getting a new magical pair of binoculars, and it made her really see birds differently. So the next example I wanted to share with you is the Clark's nutcracker.
Oh, yes.
This is a bird with an astonishing memory. It really puts to shame our own ability to remember things.
Sure does.
Yes.
I remember this one from the book.
Right. The Clark's nutcracker lives in the high mountains of the West, and it caches its own food for future use. So this bird can bury up to 30,000 pine seeds in thousands of locations over dozens of square miles. And remember where it put its individual caches, even months later. You know, despite changes in the landscape from snow and shifting rock and soil, those birds go to their individual stashes and remember where they put them. So it's really quite astonishing. Another example is...
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Because you travel around the world and you visit a lot of researchers. I mean, and that was maybe the most fascinating example in the whole book, was burying 30,000 caches and finding it. Do researchers have any idea how they do it? How their brains are
Well, that's still very much under study, but they believe that the birds actually triangulate. They use landmarks, and they use landmarks that are not buried by things, so that could be tall trees, big piles of rock. And they actually triangulate the location of the seed stashes and remember them.
Wow.
Now, how they do this, I think is still largely a mystery, but it's one of the great magnificent feats of spatial memory that I think exists in nature that we know of. So.
It makes me feel bad every time I lose something like my car keys.
Misplace your car keys. Yeah, I think of that example every time. Put down my glasses somewhere and can't find them.
Right.
So yeah. So the mockingbird is another example of a bird with a quite amazing memory. Both mockingbirds and brown thrashers can learn and remember as many as 200 to 2,000 different songs of other species, and they do that with a brain that's 1/1000th the size of ours. Quite amazing. Another bird that has a surprisingly good memory is the pigeon. Pigeons can learn and recall hundreds of pictures and store them in long-term memory for as long as a year. So I actually grew very fond of pigeons while I was writing this book, because, you know, the expression pigeon brain could be considered something actually of a compliment. I mean, you know, these birds may not be sophisticated communicators the way that a chickadee is, say, but they are very gifted learners, and they can make quite astonishing visual distinctions. They can distinguish between different letters of the alphabet, say different human faces, even different styles of painting. So
that's
one of the examples I give in the book.
Modernism, Impressionism.
Exactly. So they can categorize correctly a painting by Renoir, put it in the Impressionist category, and a Braque in with the Cubists.
Wow, that's amazing.
Better than a lot of kids can do. So yeah, the pigeon, I think, is one of my favorites. And another very intelligent bird, possibly one of the smartest birds in the world, is the African gray parrot. This bird is kind of considered the Einstein of the bird world. And it was in the 70s to the 90s that Irene Pepperberg at Harvard worked with a bird named Alex to really convey to the world the amazing intellectual abilities of African gray parrots. And she taught Alex hundreds of words that he could both understand and also use himself in a meaningful way. So he knew his colors and shapes and numbers. So Irene Pepperberg could ask him, okay, Alex, how many green shapes do we have on the table out of an array of different colored objects? And Alex could say 2 or 4 or 6. So this is really a kind of intelligence that goes way beyond just mere mimicry. But these birds also have a genius for that. The bird on the screen there, Throckmorton, belongs to friends of mine, Bob and Karen, and this bird loves to mercilessly tease his family by mimicking their voices. So he does Bob and Karen's voice so well that they themselves can't tell whether they're being hailed by their bird or their spouse. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, and I was on a radio program, and a trucker called in and said that he had a pet African gray parrot that rode in a little seat next to him in the truck. And this bird, every time he passed a Hardee's, would just go bananas, because at the Hardee's, where this bird was from in North Dakota, they gave him a hash brown every time he went in. So the bird knew the red and white Hardee's sign, and we just, yeah. So the great mystery is that, you know, birds do all of this with a packet of brain so tiny that it would fit inside a walnut. Oops. This is a bird I like to. It's a tufted titmouse, but I like to call it conehead.
It looks like one. It's from France.
Yeah. So you know, birds have very tiny brains. In the case of the hummingbird, their brains are as small as a grain of rice.
Wow.
And they have tremendous capacity to. They have great spatial memories as well. So how is this possible?
Yeah.
You know, well, we sort of understand now that size is really not the main indicator of intelligence, that it's about the density of neurons in the brain in birds. And when it comes to dense neurons, birds really, they pack very dense neurons in their brains. And it's, especially in species like parrots and corvids, they have very, very densely packed neurons. And a bird that is arguably the smartest bird in the world is the New Caledonian crow. This is, I traveled a lot for this book.
Yeah,
I went to
you
lots
might
of
want to
different.
tell us where New Caledonia is, since
Yeah,
it's fairly obscure.
It's a little island, tropical island in the Southwest Pacific,
Yep.
between Australia and Fiji. And it's small and it's very sparsely populated, but it is the sole home of this amazing bird, the New Caledonian crow. And this bird is renowned for problem-solving skills and also for making and using its own tools. And the bird in the photograph there is making a hook tool. Wow. And there are only 2 species on this planet that make hook tools, humans and New Caledonian crows. And they use the hook tools to kind of fish out grubs from the holes in trees. And they have different styles of tool making in different parts of the island. Yeah. So, you know, they pass them down over generations. It's really a very good definition of culture. So the bottom line is that birds have really taught us that there's more than one way to wire a clever brain. That birds, they learn their songs the way that we learn language. Mm-hmm. And when they sleep, their brain waves, their REM sleep, slow wave sleep, are the same as ours. So we're learning a lot about our own cognition by studying bird brains. But I think what I want people to take away from this book is the idea that birds are clever creatures, whether they're the super smart corvids and parrots, or the birds around us, which are also very surprisingly bright. The sparrows, tits, finches, all of those birds that we see every day. To see them a little differently as the really clever and creative and innovative creatures that they are.
Well, thank you. That was a great overview of what's a very rich book. Let me ask you just a couple questions. I mean, the obvious one is because you've covered so many topics as an author and reporter. Yeah. How did you seize upon this one for your most recent book? Well,
I've been a bird watcher since I was a child. My father took me bird watching on the C&O Canal in D.C., and we were one of 5. I was one of 5 girls, and the only way to spend time with my dad was to bird watch with him. Yeah. So I grew to love it, and it's been with me pretty much, all of my life. In my first book, Notes from the Shore, I wrote about the osprey and about shorebirds. But then it was really about 5 or 10 years ago that these papers began to come out about Betty, the New Caledonian crow that could bend a piece of wire and grab a little bucket of food from the bottom of a tube. And then there were the stories about Alex with Irene Pepperberg. And I thought, wow, these birds are, we're beginning to discover something really new here and very exciting. And so, yeah, I was hooked.
You mentioned a number of the smarter species of birds, crows, ravens, osprey, parrots, and so on. Is there any reason why that, especially corvidae, seem to be so intelligent? Is there something about their lifestyle that requires more intelligence?
Well, we're just trying to sort this out. It's still largely a mystery, and the big question about the New Caledonian crow, say, is, why is this bird so special? Is
On
it
this
about
little island in the Pacific?
right?
Yeah.
Is it about its genes, or does it have something to do with its island environment? It's an island that's largely free of predators, and these birds have a very long juvenile period, long childhood. And generally, intelligence and long juvenile periods go together in animals, including ourselves.
Right.
And so this is perhaps a factor, but what scientists are looking at now is they're comparing actually the genomes of the New Caledonian crow with crows that live in similar and different environments to see whether there's a difference in their genome or perhaps a difference in the environment. But still very mysterious.
Without being prejudiced, are there some birds that are on the duller end of the IQ spectrum?
Oh, yes. Well, in the book I describe one way of measuring bird intelligence, and there are definitely birds at the top like the corvids and parrots, and then there are birds at the bottom of the scale like ostriches, turkeys, and one of my favorites, the emu.
The emu, yes, which you hopefully will see.
But this is really, it's just one measure of intelligence, so I feel that those birds are probably underestimated in perhaps in other ways. We're just beginning to understand how to measure intelligence in an animal. The field is really in its infancy. And so I do feel that there are kinds of intelligence that we may not yet be aware of and capable of measuring.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that was really interesting, you had a picture of a pigeon up there. And just to give a sense of how rich the text is, you told a fascinating story about carrier pigeons, homing pigeons, and so on. And even with the history, like the Romans used them, which was new to me.
Right.
And we had a pigeon service with like 50,000 pigeons or something at one point, which was extraordinary.
Did in the military,
yeah.
Absolutely.
But that's a type of intelligence that's certainly lost on me, which is being able to find your way home from new destinations.
Yeah.
How do pigeons do that? How do they return?
So again, navigation is one of the is a big black box. Now we're coming to understand it better. Birds have this tremendous capacity to integrate different kinds of information.
Yeah.
So we understand that they're somehow sensing magnetic fields. They're using landmarks. They're using sound, even smell. They're using sun,
wow.
Sun and stars. In small scale navigation, birds use smell, and they're even thinking that birds may use infrasound, which is something they don't know how they detect it, but it's a possibility under investigation. So again, we're still working on sorting that out, but pigeons have been a great, the laboratory rat in navigation studies, and I go into that in some depth.
All those
in the
wonderful
book.
homing pigeons on the tops of New York apartment buildings are fascinating. And we're really interested in migratory birds too, and I found it very interesting that some birds can actually migrate to places they haven't been before.
Yes, and I was first introduced to this concept writing my first book, the ospreys in the area. Yeah. Even the first year birds knew where their natal home was and returned to it. And it was amazing to me. They were flying down to Brazil and the Amazon to winter, and then they would come straight back to their breeding grounds, and they somehow knew where they were. And it's really an astonishing thing that that birds have an understanding of how to get to places they've never been before. So, yeah.
you make a strong case. Birds are very successful species, successful offshoot of dinosaurs, basically.
Right.
And there's billions more of them than us, highly diverse, every continent and so on.
Yes.
Are there any challenges that birds are currently facing to their success?
Oh, huge challenges. And I mean, I think we are living in a very threatening age for birds in terms of climate change and also habitat loss. And I think the birds that are under greatest threat are the ones who are specialists. They either live in a very particular habitat and can't live anywhere else, and that habitat is diminishing. Or they could be migratory species that depend on the timing of their food sources for staging grounds, and the bloom of insects and other kinds of food sources, the timing is now becoming an issue for these birds. So I think there are tremendous challenges ahead, and you know, we need to do everything that we can to protect habitat and to...
We're trying.
I know. This is a wonderful place doing good work, and it is so necessary.
Two quick final questions
Sure.
related. The first one is, after you finish a book like this, and particularly doing the research and learning so much about the intelligence of birds, do you look at them differently than you did prior to this book?
Absolutely. I mean, I see... my first real experience with that was with the chickadees, because now I just stop and I just listen. And I'm actually a big lumbering, kind of non-threatening predator, so I don't get a lot of Ds.
Right.
But it totally changes. And I also am very interested in mixed flocks and what's going on there and the different ways that birds are signaling each other. And the migratory and navigational skills of birds are very present for me when I see a flock of geese or any species, warblers migrating through the area.
You can appreciate the challenges they face. And the last
Right.
question, having written this book, and it's so rich, so many topics are covered, is there one particular message you hope readers would take after reading this book?
Yes, I hope that readers will first see birds differently, but also maybe think about the different kinds of intelligence in the natural world, and that there may be ways that are ways of knowing beyond our own. I think it's important for us to think about intelligence in a different way.
It's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time.
Thank
and I'd
you
like to
very
thank
much.
everybody who took the time to tune into this broadcast. Thank you very much.